The New York City school year got off to a violent start with an increase in deadly weapons and the murder of a student in his school. Now some are calling for tighter security, but others are concerned it will criminalize our children.
When I go to school and I feel like I'm not safe, and I think I can speak for all people, it affects you spiritually, mentally, and physically.
Safety fears are a daily reality for a majority of students and teachers, according to the Department of Education's own survey. The number of weapons seized in schools is up by nearly 50%, with 328 for July 1st to October 1st, 2017, compared to 222 for the same period last year.
The students have a sense that they could do whatever they want in our schools, so they're bringing in more weapons.
18-year-old Abel Cedeno allegedly used a serrated switchblade to stab and kill 15-year-old Matthew McCree at their high school in the Bronx. Urban education expert Brian Favors tells me another layer of adult intervention could de-escalate these situations before they turn violent.
We need to really be intentional about looking at how do you create a village in the school. That means training for teachers and cultural competence and how to handle conflicts, because a lot of these conflicts could be resolved.
The tragedy created an outcry for metal detectors, which were promptly installed in the school. Only about 6% of New York City middle and high schools have them. The concern by the administration is the undertone of criminalization.
In addition to the permanent scanners that are in the school, we have the ability to go to any school on any given day and do scanning there.
A growing number of community leaders and parents say kids should not have to face their fears on their own.
When you're trying to focus on school, you also have a whole lot of problems that's in your mind running through it. Oh, what if I run into this person this day or after school? What am I going to do? You're thinking, and that all affects your academics, which will affect the rest of your life, will affect your career, and that's not good.
Some say school safety measures need to keep up with our changing times. Let's take it to our panel and find out what they have to say. Joining me is Dr. Darren Porcher. He's a former NYPD lieutenant and criminal justice professor. Darren, great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Also with us is Brian Favors. He's an educator. His website is culturallyresponsiveteaching.com. His company is Breaking the Cycle Consulting Services. He works with a lot of students in city schools. Brian, great to have you with us.
Great to be here always.
Also with us is Matthew. He's a 13-year-old 8th grader in a charter school. He attended public schools, and he's also attended a number of our Street Soldiers public events and town halls. So Matthew, great to have you here with us in studio.
Glad to be here.
Appreciate it. Also with us is Lynette Townsley. She's the NAACP Youth Advisor. She's a parent of 2 boys, and she is the manager of after-school programs. Lynette, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Matthew, help us understand, what's it like for students going to school right now in terms of concerns about their safety?
When kids go to school nowadays, they're worried about problems that they have with other people. So they start to feel unsafe, and honestly, that's not what school was made for kids to feel unsafe, but it's problems around the community that start these problems.
And give us an idea, when you talk about problems with other kids, what kinds of problems did you see happening, do you see happening around you, or do you hear about from your friends and your classmates?
Most of the time it's based on personal problems that they get themselves into and don't know, they don't want to go to an adult or a teacher because they're scared of what they'll be judged as.
And that's got to be, Brian, as an educator and as a parent, that's got to break your heart when you hear that the kids feel like they're on their own.
They are. And then not only that, they're walking into schools that are often hostile, going through metal detectors. I know students that get stopped and frisked on the way to school, and then they come into school and they got beef, issues with this group of young people who are from this project. And most schools aren't villages. Most of the kids aren't learning in school how to even break that cycle. Most teachers and I was in 22 schools last year. Most of our schools have not been prepared to deal with that. Most of the schools are as scared of the students as everyone else. And a lot of these, and you remember when I met you, I was here with the Bushwick 32 from that school that sued the NYPD. We had a village. In 12 years, we had 2 fights, but we had a staff that was intentional about learning about cultural competence and building a community so that when kids had conflict, because we had Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings in that school, they had people they could go to, mediate those conflicts. We had relationships with the community we could bring folks in. And most schools don't have that village. So our kids are having to be scared of one another as well as the teachers and the law enforcement that's in school. And that's a recipe for disaster. And that also explains why half of our kids aren't graduating.
And with a lot of the problems, Lynette, as a parent, and also you work as an after-school manager with a lot of kids in that capacity as well, what do you see happening? Because people who are not familiar with urban life or with the city school system, they just don't get it. They're like, why are there so many weapons? And the NYPD is telling us there was about a 48% increase in the number of weapons just brought in this first month of the school year.
Unfortunately, I think that our schools are not equipped with the resources needed to deal with the children's conflicts of interest or any issues that they have. My youngest son, for instance, he went to a school that was co-located and had a...
Explain what co-located means.
Where it was 2 different schools in one school.
In one building.
In one building. So with that, sometimes you get the students that, you know, feel they're better than the other ones, or there's some conflict. And my son didn't start it, but it was a big fight, and I actually took him out of school until they had a meeting with the parents and the students to try to help find out what happened. But my son was I kept him out of school for a whole week.
Because you were concerned about his safety.
About his safety, not only his safety, but the other children's. And it was so bad that school safety had to get involved, the borough leader for school safety. But in the beginning, they wasn't doing it. They was just telling me to bring my son back to school. And I said, no, until you address this issue, he can't come in learning, thinking that, oh, am I going to have a fight again, or is somebody going to jump me?
And Darren, in terms of the atmosphere, from a law enforcement perspective, a lot of people are saying, you know what, just put the metal detectors in. There's metal detectors in only about 6% of the city schools, and some people say that's the answer, and then the kids won't be bringing weapons in. But is it that simple?
I don't think the metal detectors are the solution or the panacea to this problem. I think this is something that's more of a social construct that's going bad. And so oftentimes one of the first things that we speak of is we think of police to come in with the immediate arrests or apprehension techniques, so on and so forth. I think that the police can infuse a strategy with educators, but that strategy has to evolve around not arresting, but educating the students. So you can have officers that work in each and every school. Now keep in mind, there's not a one fixed solution. But you need to have officers that are working in the school, working hand in hand with the educators to determine the pulse or the propensities for violence in these schools.
Doesn't that bother you when you have an 11, 12, and 13-year-old kid saying, we're on our own here. There's no adult we can trust to talk to and say, we've got a problem. Something's about to pop off and we don't know what to do.
And that evolves around the educator and the police working hand in hand.
I don't think having cops with badges in schools is the answer.
As a mother, as an educator yourself, as somebody who spends a lot of time with our kids and with our youth, does it break your heart that they don't feel safe just trying to get an education?
Absolutely. It's all of our responsibility to educate the whole child, not just academically, but emotionally and socially as well. And I think when it comes to the emotional and social development, we're not meeting the standards that our youth need today. And that's where the conflicts come in. You know, why do you have a need to bring a knife or a gun? It's because you're trying to deal with a conflict and you don't know any other way to deal with it. So that's our responsibility as adults to help the youth. And I don't think having cops with badges in schools is the answer. I think we need other resources like guidance counselors, social workers, conflict resolution people to help the students.
And counselors, like
yes.
Just like guidance counselors, like you said. Matthew, what about that? Do you think that that's the answer, or do you think that would help?
I think that would help a lot, because most of these problems start from groups that look at each other and think, oh, we're not friends or we're not cool. So if everybody in that school or that building or that community could actually associate with one another, have people guide them into being friends again, not having so many problems, I think that would stop a lot more of the problems, instead of having kids come to the school seeing metal detectors and a whole bunch of cops just surrounding them, feeling like it's a whole bunch of criminals in the school.
Brian, what about the layers and also the layers of adult supervision too? Talking about guidance counselors, does there need to be something else besides teachers, school safety officers as the only options?
You know what? In some schools, it's the guidance counselors. In some schools, it's the history teacher. In some schools, we need people who know how to play this role. Period. And my concern is I believe we need more guidance counselors and social workers and whatnot, but they have to be culturally competent. I see in the schools that I'm in a lot of guidance counselors who are not prepared to deal with the Brevoort Marcy beef that brings its way into the school. And not only that, we want to make sure that not only are they safe in school, that when they leave, because most of the schools I'm in, they're not bringing guns in because it's metal detectors. But guess what? The neighborhood's not safe. I still hear gunshots at night in Bed-Stuy. But one of the great things about the students that I brought out here years ago was we were in a school where they were learning about how those divisions were systematic from the beginning. They were taking African studies, Latin American studies, and we were having after-school men's groups where we were arguing, how can we be so safe here? How can we build this outside? And I remember after we did this show and we mobilized around the Bushwick 32, our enrollment was bigger than it had ever been the next year because people were coming to our school because it was a safe haven. Right. And I think when we start to create villages where kids feel safe, where they're connected to community, we'll see a drop in violence. So I do agree there has to be a shift in culture, but how do you go about providing educators and people who are responsible to make sure that they're culturally competent and prepared to deal with these issues? And these issues are complex because our kids are dealing with the systematic, sociological, and economic impact of generations and generations and generations of poverty.
But is it also because many adults, Darren Porcher, let's face it, many adults are afraid of our youth. As soon as they get a certain size, they're afraid of the youth, they're afraid of the youth culture, they're afraid of a lot of it. And they don't understand it, and they're just afraid, period.
You're referring to implicit bias, and absolutely, unfortunately, we as African Americans have an implicit bias towards other African Americans. We have we see a perceived threat based on those individuals. But just to piggyback on what this gentleman mentioned, we look at the organizational and cultural changes, and not just the police department, but educators. It needs to be a situation whereas the educator needs to be at the forefront, the police person should be at the back end. Because I see many times in these schools, you have a dean of discipline, and that's the person that manages a lot of these conflicts that happen in these schools. Oftentimes that person is incapable. They've been placed in that position by default. So you can still have that person at the forefront, but just provide them with the additional resources, the intelligence that tells them this is what's happening. In addition to that, as the young man mentioned, the conflicts that happen in the neighborhood, this is something whereas the Community Affairs Bureau in the NYPD can be of great assistance to whereas you have these conflicts such as a gang rivalry or something to that effect that's occurring in these neighborhoods. And so you need someone that can have more of a softer approach to translate that information that's happening in those neighborhoods to the educators that are in the school.
Matthew, where are the kids getting the weapons from?
The kids are getting their weapons from the ideas in their head that say, I can't talk about this situation. I have to use violence as the answer. And I think that this could be cut off at a young age if schools didn't only have Common Core classes. If they had classes that taught kids how to survive in the wild, or how to communicate or show their feelings to one another, so that they wouldn't just be all riled up and then one time all their feelings just pop and then it ends up in a fight, or they end up getting a weapon to come.
Now tell us what happened with you, because you're a good student, you're very culturally aware, you're very community minded, but you were driven to some kind of behavior. Tell us about that.
One day I was in a public school, I was 18, and a group of kids, I saw my brother playing with an older group of kids. They were 2 years older than us. So my brother and them, they were play fighting. I thought they were real fighting because I didn't know the boys, so I jumped in, I pushed him, and then my brother, he comes out of nowhere and says, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I thought y'all was fighting." But what really happened was that they were play fighting, so then I started play fighting with them, and we continue this every day after school. But then after a while, I started getting home late, which means I started finishing my homework later, which affected me in my school academics. So then I decided to stop playing so much after school and go straight home to do what I have to do. But the kids, they didn't want to stop playing. They wanted to keep playing. So every day we would just continue doing the same thing. And after a while, it got annoying because when I wanted to stop playing, they didn't want to stop playing. So eventually.
So they didn't respect your choice.
Yes, they didn't respect my choice. So eventually, I didn't want to go. I didn't feel comfortable going to a teacher, because then I will be viewed as, people say, a snitch. I will be grouped in somebody that they won't want to mess with. They won't want to be friends with. So then I decided to bring a knife to school. It wasn't to stab anybody, but it was to show them that I'm serious now. I'm not playing anymore. That if I don't want to play, then I don't want to play. You have to respect what I want to do.
So when you told them, listen, I can't do this anymore, I need to go home and do my homework, I got to worry about my schoolwork, did they make fun of you? Did they intimidate you?
They didn't make fun of me, but
pressured you?
They were like, I don't care, or they pressured me. They'd be like, come on. They'd be like, come on, we just playing around. And then after a while, it just got so annoying that I just didn't want to do it anymore.
And so you brought the knife to let them know you were serious?
Yes. And
then what happened?
But they never found out I had the knife, because it never got to that. One day when I was in school, it was in my book bag, and I opened up my book bag and it fell out. So a boy that didn't like me at the time, we weren't friends, he told the principal on me. And so the principal told me to bring my stuff, and he asked me, he said, do you have a weapon on you? My first answer was no, because I didn't know what the consequences were. I didn't know what would happen. And then he asked me again, and this time I decided to say yes, because I knew that if I lied again, then the consequences would be worse. So I decided to tell him where it was. He told me, and I ended up getting a superintendent suspension. I had to go to a whole nother school for a couple, I think for a week or two, and then. But then...
Did they ever ask you, when you were there with the principal, did they ever ask you why?
Yeah.
Did you feel you needed to bring a knife to school?
They did ask me why, and that day I did tell them, but I got a severe consequence for bringing the knife for school. I did deserve a consequence. But then the kids that were... Because this would be considered bullying. The kids that were...
Sounds like it.
Yeah, the kids that were bullying me, was called Nothing Happened to Them. I gave them a list. I gave them the names, and they said they talked to the kids, but nothing happened.
And the kids were still at that school when you came back from your suspension?
Yes.
Darren, what do you think about that?
Well, just the superintendent's suspension is mandatory when someone is caught with a weapon in a school. So the principal doesn't have any leeway with that. My heart goes out to you in that situation. One of the things that I think about in terms of how could he better connect with an administrator, I think that there are two factions. Oftentimes you have that socialization piece that dictates, look, I don't want to be a snitch, I want to be a part of the culture. I think that if you can introduce people that are either prior gang members or people that have just gone through the reentry process and they're looking to turn things around, and these are people that have a level of street credibility, so to speak. You partner those individuals with professionals, and then you have team building, like maybe after school during a lunch break, you have this person that has that credibility where people are willing to accept them as somebody that I can talk to.
Brian, what about that? This comes back to this idea of like some type of counselors or some, especially for the boys.
It's interesting that he says that, because we used to do that. We used to bring a lot of, when I was teaching in Bushwick, you weren't allowed to flag in the school, and we had OGs that would enforce that because this was safe space in the hood, and I agree with him. The only problem is a lot of the people that my kids would listen to, that I work out with at the park, they can't get into the schools.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being with us for this episode of Street Soldiers. Dr. Darren Porcher, Brian Favors, Matthew and Lynette Townsley, thank you so much for being with us. And remember, use your mind. It's your best weapon. I hope it's your only weapon. I'm Lisa Evers. Let's push for peace.